Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another daily dose of Streets of New Capenna Commander spoilers. So officially, Commander Precon spoiler season is Monday and Tuesday of next week, but today we got some early spoilers, and we got the cards from the set boosters, the set booster Commander exclusive. So I figured I should probably do a video, talk about these sweet new Commander cards. If you want to see the main set stuff, videos up over on the main channel. I'll post a card, post a link, go check that out. But anyway, before we jump into these sweet new Commander cards, two quick reminders. Number one, if you want to keep up on all the latest previews throughout the day, you'll find them all over at mtgpreviews.com. Number two, if you need some new Capenna cards, or any cards for that matter, you can get them from our awesome sponsor, Card Kingdom, by heading over to cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish, and even get a free goldfish sticker. Just let them know you want one in your order notes, and they will hook you up. Anyway, let's talk Streets of New Capenna Commander. So first up, we got some Commander Precon cards. So Commander Precons, we got 5 of them coming with Streets of New Capenna Monday and Tuesday next week. We're supposed to be getting the full decks. We also already got the face commanders. We talked about those a few days ago. Check out that video if you're interested. But we got a few interesting ones today, starting with Mari the Killing Quill. So 3 mana 3/2 legendary vampire assassin says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it with a hit counter on it, and then assassins, mercenaries, and rogues you control have death touch. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, you may remove a hit counter from a card a player owns in exile. If you do, draw a card and make 2 treasure tokens. This card actually seems really powerful to me. So on level 1, it reminds me a little bit of Giza Glorious Resurrector, although I want to point out a difference here. This is the main reason I want to talk about Giza. If you read Giza, it says if a creature an opponent controls would die, exile it instead. Mari doesn't say that. It says whenever a creature an opponent controls dies, exile it with a hit counter on it. There's a big difference here. Giza is a replacement effect. So rather than going to the graveyard, a creature an opponent controls that dies just goes to exile. Mari is not a replacement effect. The card goes to the graveyard and then to exile with a triggered ability. And why this matters is death triggers in specific. Giza shuts down Blood Artist, shuts down any death style trigger. Because the creatures aren't dying, they're going to exile. Mari's not going to do that. So it's not really a hate card for death triggers. Just something to keep in mind if you decide to play with the card. Because one of the upsides of Giza is it is kind of this weird graveyard hate spell. Mari still hates on reanimation, let's say, because the creature is not going to stay in the graveyard, but it's not going to hate on the Blood Artist style effects. So as far as playing this card, I think it's really interesting. The batching effect, having these 3 different tribes on there. It's kind of a commander for 3 different tribes. And one of the cool things about it is you really have your options. You could build Assassin Tribal with this being your leader. You could build Rogue Tribal with this being your leader. You could build Mercenary Tribal with this being your leader, or just jam them all together and play some of each. Mercenary is probably the most interesting inclusion, just because it's not been a supported tribe for a long time. I believe in the modern era, going back 20 years now almost, I think there's 2 mercenaries, and they're both red cards, and they're both like random commons. The last black mercenary we got that's not a reprint was actually an Onslaught and Doom Necromancer. So the last time we really saw mercenary support, we're talking like 20 plus years ago now, a very long time ago. So it's cool to see some more mercenary support and having a sweet commander to lead a mercenary tribal deck. And the ability is actually really strong because your assassins, mercenaries, and rogues have death touch. Your opponent's not really going to want to block them, so your odds of getting in hits with them are pretty high. And then, assuming you have killed some stuff or wrath resolved or whatever, and there's some cards exiled with hit counters, you get a ton of value. Like every single attack is going to be able to remove a hit counter, and then you're going to draw a card and you're going to make 2 mana. That's a lot of value. That can snowball really fast. So I think this is actually a really powerful card as your commander. The other place this is going to shine, and probably its best home, is in the 99 of Atrata the Silencer. Atrata, really hard alt-win condition because it shuffles back into your deck, but it cares about hit counters on cards in exile. Mari is, I think, the only other way in all of Magic now to get hit counters on things. So it seems pretty easy in a Atrata deck. If you can tutor up your Mari, kill some creatures to get some hit counters, then you only need to get in a single attack with Atrata and get 1 creature exiled to get 1 more hit counter to actually win the game. So this massively improves the odds of getting an Etrata kill in your Etrata Commander deck. Also seems pretty sweet in just some other decks that care about its creature types or care about attacking, like Marchesa makes Assassin's tokens, so that works really well with Mari. You got stuff like Kelsey in another Assassin style deck. Mathis maybe is another option. So Mari, I think it's a really neat card. I could imagine playing this as my commander in some sort of batching Assassin Mercenary Rogue style deck just to generate card advantage or treasure tokens, and I'm certainly hyped about jamming it in the 99, especially of Etrata, but some other decks as well. We also got Vazi Keen Negotiator, which is a weird new Jund legend. 5 mana, 3/3 human advisor. It has haste, and it says tap to let target opponent create X treasures, where X is the number of treasures you created this turn. So essentially, you play a dockside and get a bunch of treasures, then you tap this and you choose an opponent to also get that many treasures. And then it says when an opponent casts a spell or activates an ability, if mana from a treasure was spent to cast or activate it, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature and draw a card. Worth noting here, let's say you give your opponent a ton of treasures and they use 5 of them to cast a 5-drop, you still only get 1 +1/+1 counter and 1 card. You're not getting it for each treasure, you're just getting 1 counter and card for each spell that's cast or ability that's activated with a treasure. So Vazi, it's really hard for me to imagine wanting to give my opponent treasures. It seems really easy to just lose. Like, here, I play my dockside, I make 10 treasures. Why don't you also have 10 treasures? And then your opponent just exsanguinates you or Torment of Hail fires you. It seems really bad. I guess if you want to do it for fun, some sort of weird group hug style thing, or maybe there's some group slug thing where you can end up punishing your opponent for having artifacts enter the battlefield or something, maybe that could be an option. But really, the idea of playing this as your commander and just giving your opponent a ton of mana seems really risky. I guess some people have mentioned like, oh, you like give them a ton of mana and wait for them to cast their Exsanguinate and then try to like dual cast their mage so yours resolves first. That seems like a lot of hoops to jump through. So I actually don't think this is a very good commander. Although, if you do want to try to build around it, there are some interesting synergies to build a pretty janky but maybe pretty fun Vazi deck, because it is really unique. There's stuff like Viridian Revel that draws you cards whenever an artifact goes into opponent's graveyard from the battlefield. So more punishment for treasures. Magnetic Mind, Disciple of the Vault can deal damage or drain your opponent. Bootlegger Stash, oh my god, so many treasures can be made and then given to your opponent to trigger your other stuff. So while it's more of a janky, fun, unique brew around, and probably not super competitive, because all the stuff I said before about giving your opponent a bunch of treasures being really risky and maybe killing you does still apply. There is a way you can do it if you want to, and there is another way to take advantage of this. Even if you don't play as your commander, it is kind of interesting. It's just a hate card. I wish it was a little less mana. If this was like 3 mana or maybe 4 mana, it would be much more exciting. But if you think about current commander, and especially current commander post Streets of New Capenna, there's a ton of treasure production. Like Smothering Tide, Dockside Extortion is 2 of the most powerful cards literally in the entire format. We got Professional Facebreaker now. We have Bootlegger Stash now to make a ton of treasures. There are so many treasures in so many decks, and what I kind of like about Vazi is playing it not to activate it, not to be like, oh, I'm going to play Dockside and give you a ton of treasures, haha, gotcha, I drew a card. No, just play it as a hate card. You run it out knowing that a lot of commander decks are going to be Docksiding or Smothering Tithing or Bootlegger Stashing, and then if your opponent uses that mana, you get some value out of it. So I like it. I wish it was a little cheaper. I think it would be much better at this role, but I do like it as a weird hate card for treasures. Whether this is better than just shutting down the treasures with a Collect Roof or Stony Silence or Null Rod or Karn the Great Creator, that is definitely a fair question. I think that it's going to draw less hate. Just hard shutting down your opponent's mana in Commander feels pretty bad. It rightly is going to make people attack you. I don't think Vazi is going to do that. I think, sure, maybe people are like a little annoyed that you're drawing cards when they sack their treasures, but really, it doesn't seem like it's not so brutal that it's like, okay, we got to kill Seth because he's got a Collect Roof and we can't execute our game plan. Instead, it's like, all right, whatever. Like, sure, you're drawing a couple cards. You paid 5 mana for Vazi. Like, I guess that's fine. So I think that Vazi, it's not a super busted hate card, but it does seem like the kind of hate card that might sit on the battlefield for a few turns because it's not super busted. And I do like seeing treasure hate showing up in Commander because treasures are just all over the place right now. Speaking of hate cards in Commander, we got a card that I really like what it's trying to do, but I don't think it does it quite well enough. Spiteful Repossession. So 5 mana sorcery. It says Spiteful Repossession deals damage to each opponent who controls more lands than you, equal to the difference. And then then you create a number of treasure tokens equal to the damage dealt this way. So essentially, you get to 5 mana, you got 5 lands. Your opponent has, whatever, 7 lands, 6 lands, one has 5 lands. You're going to get 3 damage, and then you're also going to get 3 treasures. I like that this is trying to hate on the green player. Like, one thing that I think deserves to be punished more in Commander, but not punished, like, you don't have mana, don't get to function way, but somehow punished is green ramp, because green ramp is just so incredibly powerful, and I like that this is a way that you can punish the green ramp player who's going off with their cultivates and Kadama reaches and all the crazy ramp that green gets. On the other hand, being 5 mana is just a little bit too much for what it wants to do. It seems really risky. Like, if I'm sitting down in a random commander pod, I don't think this is strong enough to put in my deck, because sure, there's going to be some times where it's going to be great, but there's going to be a lot of times when it doesn't really do much of anything. If you're not getting like 4 or 5 damage and treasures out of this, it's a really, really not great card. So I feel like I like the direction this is heading. I wish it was a little bit more competitively costed, a little bit cheaper, but I really like the idea of this card, and I'm excited to see it just because I think it means that Wizards realizes that green ramp is really powerful, and we need more ways to not shut down the green player from playing Magic, but more ways to catch up the rest of the table or punish someone for getting really far ahead on lands. So even though I don't think this quite hit the mark, I think we're heading in that direction, and we've seen this recently with like white card draw. Like, white card draw was a problem in Commander. Wizards' first attempts at fixing white card draw were just not really powerful enough to do the job, but Wizards learned from that, and then they started making better cards, and now white has pretty reasonable card draw that's actually pretty powerful. So I hope that we see the same thing happen with this punishing green ramp players in Commander. Spiteful Repossession might not be the card to get it done, but if it's the first step down that pathway, I think that we'll get there eventually. We also got one of my favorite flavor cards from the set in Boxing Ring. So Boxing Ring, 2-mana artifact. It says, when a creature enters a battlefield under your control, it fights up to 1 target creature you don't control with the same mana value, and then tap it to create a treasure token. Activate this only if you control a creature that fought this turn. So this is just so on point. Is a top-down design of a boxing match. So you have a fight, but the fighters, you got weight classes. They got to be the same weight class, so you got to fight something of the same mana value, and then there's a purse. If you win the fight, you get a treasure. That last mode, it is worth mentioning, the way it's worded, because you have to control a creature that fought this turn, it implies that you have to have won the fight, because if you lose the fight and your creature is dead, then you didn't control a creature that fought this turn. You won't be able to activate it for a treasure. So it is just like, in so many ways, the perfect top-down Magic representation of a boxing match. So while the flavor is super on point, as far as how good this card is, I think it's only okay, but I do think it has uses. One possibility is just playing it in cards with a bunch of big things that can fight, although it is worth mentioning, because you gotta fight in your same weight class, something with the same mana value, unlikely your Ghalta is gonna actually fight something, because what are the odds that your opponent has a 12 mana value creature? So that is kind of a bit of a drawback for the big creature deck plan. It still could work, but it's gonna be a little bit inconsistent. Where I think this will really shine is actual fight-themed commander decks, because the fighting with Boxing Ring itself, because it's got that weight class restriction, is gonna be a little bit inconsistent. If you can fight in other ways, though, then you can consistently make a treasure token with this, and then sometimes you might actually get to fight with Boxing Ring too. But we have commanders like Nayeth, which is all about fighting. It's essentially a straight up fight commander. It draws you cards. Hans, the creature it puts into play, is going to fight Hans. It doesn't say that you have to fight your opponent's creature to get the treasure. You just have to have a creature that fought something. So fighting Hans, perfectly legal. Gargo's all about fighting, like that's what it does. There's some Jared builds that take advantage of the fact that Jared's indestructible to do like Jared fight spells. So I think that's where I'm mostly interested in Boxing Ring. In a generic deck, I think it's too inconsistent. And when you consider its ceiling is, well, maybe doing a little bit of fighting, but its ceiling as a ramp spell is make 1 mana every turn for 2 mana. We got a lot of cards that do that in Commander. Like there's plenty of good 2 mana mana rocks, various signets and mind stones and fellware stones. There's so many options that it's not like your green deck needs this as a ramp spell. So I think you're playing this mostly for flavor, and also because it could be really powerful in a fight style deck where your deck can actively take advantage of the act of fighting. So Boxing Ring, it's a champion flavor wise, but maybe a little bit limited in as far as the number of decks it fits in Commander. We also got a handful of set booster exclusives. So only difference is, rather than getting in commander precons, they're going to come in set boosters, and some of these cards, especially this one, are pretty good. So card number 1, Bennie, Bracks, Zoologist, and wow, is this card so absurd. 4 mana, but not really, because it has Convoke, so you can tap creatures to reduce its cost, so it could even be free if you tap enough creatures. That also helps you pay for the command tax. Convoke applies, so maybe it's up to 6 mana or 8 mana because it's died a couple times. If you got enough creatures to tap, you can still get around it and get it into play for cheap. So 4 mana kind of for a 3/2 mono white Elf Druid, which is kind of weird. It has Convoked, as we talk about, and it says at the beginning of each end step, if you created a token this turn, draw a card. So white gets memed on for being bad at drawing cards, and it is true that white is not super great at just generically drawing cards. They don't get Blue Sun Zenith or whatever. They don't get, I don't know, Necropotence, Phyrexian Arena, something like that. Those aren't really white things. However, white is really good at drawing cards when it does specific white things. Look at like Saram Senior Edificer or Pure Steel Paladin. Those are incredibly powerful card draw effects. The problem is you got to be playing auras or equipment or vehicles, whatever, some narrow thing. So if you're doing that thing, the cards are some of the best card advantage in Commander. If you're not doing that thing, they're kind of useless. Well, Bennie Bracks is similar. It is giving you a ridiculous source of card advantage for a very white thing, which is making tokens, but it's a thing we haven't really had white card draw before, at least not coming from the command zone on the level of Bennie Bracks. So Bennie, all I want you to do is make tokens, and it can potentially be rewarding you with 4 cards each turn cycle, because this is triggering each and every turn. It triggers on your turn, each of your opponent's turn. So if you can build around this and have ways to be making tokens, that's 4 cards every turn cycle for 0 mana on a commander that's going to keep coming into play on the cheap if it dies because of Convoke. So this is a really, really powerful effect, and it's not that hard to be making tokens every turn. If you're playing Bennie as your commander, you can't use Tender Shoot or Verdant Force. If you're playing in the 99, you definitely can. But even in mono white, like First Response with a Pain Land, that's an easy way to just repeatedly make a token for free. And remember, this does not say creature token. It just says token, which means it combos with stuff like Smothering Tithe. Smothering Tithe, you're gonna make a token almost every turn. Like, no one pays for the Smothering Tithe. So if you get down both, your opponent's not gonna pay for the Tithe. Not only do you get the treasure is gonna trigger Bennie, so you're gonna draw a card on the end step. So it combos with one of the best white cards in the format, a card that's in every single white deck. And keep that in mind with other styles of non-creature tokens too. You can be making treasures or blood or food. It doesn't matter what kind of token it is. You're just going to be able to keep drawing cards with Bennie. And there's all kinds of just weird ways to build around this. Like Mimic Vat makes a token copy of something. Your Progenitor makes a copy of itself. Nuisance Engine. So there's a ton of ways that you can build your deck. So Bennie's going to be an absurd source of card advantage. And I gotta say, I think this is just the new best white token commander. Mono white tokens, you're looking at the list of most popular token commanders. Actually, number 1 is Elishnorn. Adeline's number 2. Darian's number 3 or 4. I think that Bennie is just way better than all of them. I'm actually kind of shocked that mono white did not have a better token commander. It's got powerful cards, like Elishnorn's a powerful card, but it doesn't specifically refer to tokens. So I think this just immediately becomes the number 1 build around mono white commander if you want to play tokens in the format. And it's even better than that, because I think this is just literally an auto include in the 99 of any token deck with white mana. Like, even if you're not playing this as your commander, just jam it in Thalisse or Tristani or Amaro, whatever token deck you're playing, this card is going to be worth it. Like, if you make it around the table one time, making a token on each player's turn, it's already going to pay for itself. And it's often going to be free in your deck because of Convoke. So you're going to be able to get it down really, really quickly without having to lose a lot of tempo. So I think that Bennie Bracks, it's absurd. It's great. It's one of the best mono white commanders we've seen in a very long time, and I totally love it. I think this is a way to give white card draw, make white really good at drawing cards when it does white things like making tokens, and I think that Bennie is a great example of that. So well done, Wizards, and just a really sweet, super powerful card. On the other hand, not all white card draw can be winners. We also got Tenuous Truce, which I like this card, but I don't think it's nearly as powerful as Bennie. So 2 mana enchantment. It enchants an opponent, and it says at the beginning of enchanted opponent's end step, you and that player each draw a card, but when you attack enchanted opponent or a planeswalker they control, or when they attack you or a planeswalker you control, sacrifice Tenuous Truce. So Tenuous Truce, as an actual Magic card, I don't think it's very good. It's kind of like a Howling Mind, but rather than hitting on everyone, it's only going to hit on one player at the table. And then, if you ever attack each other, the one person you have a truce with, it goes away. So I don't think it's super powerful, although I do love the politics of this card, the friendship. You've heard me and Tomer talk about friendship on Commander Clash for seasons now, and we always have this Tenuous Truce. It actually kind of describes our relationship perfectly. So this is the kind of card that I imagine playing and like enchanting Tomer with and trying to hope that we can, work it out and not attack each other because we both benefit from drawing cards, but knowing something's going to happen, someone's going to attack each other, it's going to go away. So I love the flavor. It is hilarious and it's just such a cool design. But as far as power level, the problem is your opponent has so much control over it. Secret Rendezvous is a white card that has definitely grown on me, and I'm not against Tenuous Truce because you're giving your opponent a card. We've seen Secret Rendezvous, if you target the right person, can actually be a pretty nice source of card advantage in white decks, even though you're the one spending the mana, you're the one spending the card. So theoretically, opponents getting more advantage out of it than you are, that's still fine. Tenuous Truce works kind of the same way. You're spending the card, you're spending the mana, you have one opponent who's also going to be drawing the card, so that's not really a deal breaker. The deal breaker is, it is really, really easy for your opponent to just get rid of this. The worst case is, you can't make an alliance with anyone at the table. You play the Tenuous Truce, they untap and attack you, and it just immediately goes away. And you spent your 2 mana for quite literally nothing. You're down a card, you're down the mana, you get nothing out of it. So how good this card is going to be is really 100% going to be based on how well you can make relations at the table. Can you politic your way into keeping this on the table? If you can, you're generating card advantage. You got one opponent that's also doing it, but that's fine because they're your friend, and hopefully they'll be attacking someone else. So I think that if you feel like you got the political skills to pull this off, it can be a good card, but it's definitely high risk and high reward. On the other hand, you can certainly play it in just some sort of group hug style deck. Like, that's the easy way to play it. Jam it in Quain or Savala, whatever group hug deck, it's going to be fine. It's not like a super duper group hug card because it's only hitting one person, but still, it is a easy card to include in a deck like that. So Tenuous Truce, I love the flavor. I love the design of this card. Power level, we'll have to wait and see. It really comes down to your political skills. My guess is I probably won't really play this card outside of just to put it on Tomer for fun, because I think it'll be hilarious. But I think in a random play group, if you don't really know your opponents, I would be worried about having this in my deck because I just wouldn't trust my ability to I don't know, make the politics work in a random table. So keep that in mind. Really cool political card, but just how strong it actually is, I guess we'll have to wait and see. Finally today, we got a sweet one in Threefold Signal. 3-mana artifact. When it enters the battlefield, scry 3, and each spell you cast that's exactly 3 colors has replicate of 3. When you cast it, you can copy it for each time you paid its replicate cost, and you may choose new targets for the copies. A copy of a permanent becomes a token. So Threefold Signal, this is kind of like a weird lithoform engine or a Mirari. But what's especially crazy about this card is you can pay 3 any number of times. Like, it's only limited by the amount of mana you have. Lithoform engine, it copies anything one time, but that's not nearly as exciting. If you can get up to 30 mana, you could copy a 3-color spell 10 times without doing anything else, which is absolutely absurd. So the limiting factor on Threefold Signal is there's just not a ton of 3-color cards. There's plenty to build a deck around, and there's some really powerful ones, but compared to like 2-color cards or monocolored cards, there's just not that many. So that's the limiting factor. But if you can build a deck that's full of 3-color cards, this card is absurd. So of course, you're gonna have to cast your 3-color card as well. So that's gonna take some mana, but once you get that spell on the stack, good lord, can you do some work with Threefold Signal. So this card's kind of unique in that it cares about cards that are exactly 3 colors. We've seen many cards in the past. They care about multicolor spells, things like that. But until New Capenna in Meeting of the 5, we've never had a card that cared specifically about cards that are exactly 3 colors. So this is the second card in Magic that references cards that are exactly 3 colors. And just so it's clear, if you cast a Abrupt Decay, if you cast a Gleneye Nephilim, if you cast a Niv Mizzet Reborn, Threefold Signal does nothing. Your spell doesn't need to be multicolored, it needs to be exactly 3 colors. So let's look at the floor of this card. The floor of this card is you cast one of the cheapest 3-color spells available, which is usually 3 mana. You cast it, let's say a Jeskai Ascendancy or an Abjan Charm or a Broker's Charm. So you spend 3 mana, you cast your Broker's Charm, then you can, as many times as you want, pay 3 mana, thanks to Threefold Signal, and get a copy of Broker's Charm. So maybe you draw 2, I don't know, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, however much mana you have. It's going to be hard to cast it too many times just because the mana does start to add up, but still, you're essentially just getting additional copies of Broker's Charm. You don't get to pay the colored mana, but you're paying 3 to get as many copies as you want. Where this card gets even more bonkers, though, is when you start casting more expensive 3-color cards. Once you start casting ultimatums, let's say, then this becomes a weird ramp spell, because let's say Genesis Ultimatum, it costs 7 mana, but the copies with Replicate only cost 3 mana. So let's say you get up to 10 mana. You can Genesis Ultimatum, pay 3 for Replicate with Threefold Signal, get 2 Genesis Ultimatums, but that's even kind of boring. But let's say you get up to 19 mana or 22 mana, you could cast that Genesis Ultimatum, and without doing anything else, copy it 4 times, 5 times, which is just ridiculous value. And with something like Genesis Ultimatum, it just snowballs so hard because you get to put your lands into play, and then you get to do it again with your next spell, and it just keeps going here. What about copying Cruel Ultimatum enough times to kill the table, or Emergent Ultimatum to tutor up everything, or Titanic Ultimatum? Your stuff's gonna be so huge. So I think that is where Threefold Signal is at the best. When you're casting big, expensive 3-color cards and turning it into a ramp spell because the Replicate cost is so low. Another sweet trick with this card is X spells. So X spells, take Villainous Wealth for example. Villainous Wealth, 3 mana, 3 colors in X to make target player exile the top X cards of their library, and you can cast any number of non-land cards from among them with converted mana cost X or less without paying their mana cost. It's essentially like a weird reverse Genesis wave almost that can hit spells too. So the trick here is, let's say you cast a Villainous Wealth, I don't know, for some big amount of mana, for 12 mana, so it's X equal 9, and then you have a little bit of mana left over. You can pay 3 mana to replicate it, and your replicated Villainous Wealth is still going to be X equal 9. It's not going to be X equals 0 or X equal 3, anything like that. So that's another really sweet shenanigan, getting to maintain the X on these big X spells. I guess Lavalanche is another one, but Villainous Wealth is probably my favorite. As far as where this fits, I guess Ramos might be the best commander, because remember, even though Threefold Signal cares specifically about 3-color cards, it still does work with cards that care about multicolor effects. Like Ramos cares about that. You can also play like Cloven Casting. Whenever you cast a multicolor instant or sorcery, pay 1, you get a copy of it. Cloven Casting is not going to trigger your Threefold Signal. You're not going to be able to replicate it, but it still cares about similar things because multicolor cards are 3-color cards. Same with like General Ferrous Rockerick. All your 3-color cards are going to be triggering your General Ferrous Rockerick, even though it is only a 2-color card, or Tome of the Guild Pack is going to draw you cards as you're casting your 3-color cards, even though it isn't a 3-color card itself. So I think that is the direction to go with this card, but I love this card. I think this card's really neat. I think because it cares specifically about 3-color cards, it's a little limited. If you just look through a list of 3-color cards, there's not a ton in an absolute sense, and then a lot of them are legendary, and this doesn't work that well with legends because you're just going to legend rule yourself. So I don't think this card is broken or bannable or anything like that, but this just seems like an incredibly fun card to have as your hidden commander in some sort of 3-color deck. You play this, you cast your ultimatums, you cast your charms, any 3-color stuff, and it is going to get really absurd really quick and just do all kinds of ridiculous things. Finally, not technically a spoiler, but we also learned we're getting a Streets of New Capenna treatment of Rafiq of the Many coming in the set boosters. So if you want to fancy Streets of New Capenna Rafiq, look for it in the set boosters. It does look pretty cool. Anyway, that brings us to the end of our daily Streets of New Capenna Commander spoilers for today. So let me know what you think. What do you think about these new cards, the precon cards, the set booster cards? What decks are they going in? What are you building with them? Which are you most hyped for? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I will be back on Monday with more Streets of New Capenna Commander spoilers. So until then, again, have a great weekend, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.